2 years ago, when I really started creating content for this YouTube channel, I made a video on color grading SLOG-2 footage with my Sony a7 III camera. I had no idea that that video would blow up and become one of my highest viewed, currently sitting at around 80,000 views. Many of you are probably subscribers not only because of that video, but also the other content I created on exposing SLOG-2 and Sony mirrorless stuff in general. Now, all that being said, making my own content for YouTube has been an extremely satisfying experience. I feel like I'm able to share some of the knowledge that I've learned over the years, and I always love reading the things that people have to say in the comments. But another thing that I see in the comments are loads of questions. Now, I do my best to answer these, but I've realized that oftentimes they don't get read, or I'll see the same question asked by many different people. So I wanted to make a video kind of clarifying and answering all of those questions, specifically on SLOG-2, but also just shooting with mirrorless Sony cameras in general. With that being said, let's jump into those questions. So this is from Gidunk13, and this was on a video I made about the key to color grading. So Gidunk says, what color mode and saturation do you use in camera with PP, picture profile, and SLOG-2? So I made a video specifically on all my picture profile and SLOG-2 settings. Make sure to check that out. That will be linked below. It's literally just the standard SLOG-2 profile. I don't make any changes to the detail levels, the saturation levels, the picture profile. It's just picture profile 7. Just like that. So question 3 is from Sony Photography, and this was on my exposing SLOG-2 video. He asks, why are you not allowed to essentially shoot below 800 ISO when you're shooting in log formats? And essentially when you're shooting in log, the camera is changing the gamma curve that it uses to collect data into the sensor of the camera, right? So to achieve that gamma curve, the sensitivity of the camera needs to be a little bit higher. So the ISO needs to be at 800 minimum for the Sony a7 III when you're shooting an SLOG-2. Other cameras will have different base sensitivities or base ISOs. So if you notice that some have like a dual base ISO, that means that you will get that kind of perfected gamma curve that these companies have created at those 1 or 2 specific ISOs. Okay, question 4 from Ethan Lucas, and this was on a color grading SLOG-2 video. Ethan, thanks for your support. I see your comments all the time. He asks, do you use a polarized filter? This footage looks really, really nice. So I never use polarizer filters. I used to a lot when I was first getting started because it does give you that contrast. And if you ever need to shoot through glass or like a car window, they do come in handy. The only filter I will use is a variable ND. And then when I'm using my FX6 and I'm doing something like a music video, I'll probably use something like a little bit more artistic sometimes. Like I definitely use the Prism Effects, whatever the Dream Effects filter they have, which makes things look really bloomy and highlighty. But yeah, no polarized filters for me. Okay, next question from Summer of 69, and this was on the exposing SLOG-2 video. Have you ever used SLOG-2 indoors or for an indoor interview? I have an interview tomorrow to do, and I don't want to mess this up. So first of all, dude, I hope that your shoot went okay. This is what I'll talk about a little bit later. When you don't know how to properly expose SLOG-2 or color grade log in general, this doesn't just apply to SLOG-2, you probably shouldn't use it on a high profile, high paid client right away. I've seen a lot of horror stories of people that will shoot in log expecting amazing results, like it's supposed to give you more flexibility. But if you don't know what you're doing and you do mess it up, then you've just put yourself in a much worse situation than if you just use the standard profile and exposed based off of what you saw on your monitor. So I do use SLOG-2 indoors, definitely. I love shooting in log in general indoors, but that's only because I've been doing it for a long time and I know what I'm doing. From Marco Canlas, and Marco, you are a huge supporter of the channel. I really appreciate all the comments on Instagram and YouTube. You're an OG, my man. But he says, bro, does this work for SLOG-3 too? And this was referring to a video I created on exposing for SLOG-2. This is a tricky one because yes and no. It should work. My theory for SLOG-2 was that I expose up until my highlights are clipped, and then I usually roll them back via looking at my zebras or my waveforms, so my highlights aren't clipping anymore. Yes, theoretically that would work totally fine for SLOG-3, but the thing is you don't need to, especially on like the FX3 and the Sony a7 III and the a7 IV, like all these newer cameras don't need to be overexposed when shooting in SLOG-3.Cine. Very long-winded way of saying yes, that method would work fine, but you don't need to do it. Whereas on the a7 III on SLOG-2, it is recommended that you overexpose a little bit so your shadows aren't noisy. Okay, question 8. This is from Karina Uono. Karina says, hey Timmy, thanks for the video. I wanted to ask if the zebra is just to monitor highlights only. Is there a zebra option for the gray or black levels? I watched a video by Gerald Undone who was adjusting the zebras. Essentially the question is can I use zebras to check exposure on more than just the high end? And the answer is yes, absolutely. You can use zebras to expose any single part of your image. You can set the custom zebra level yourself in all of these cameras. So you can kind of get an understanding of what the IRE scale or what a waveform scale kind of indicates, and you can select different chunks of your IRE scale to say, I want the zebras to appear on my monitor when it's on 60 to 70 IRE, which is usually around what people like to expose skin tones. So in this situation, Gerald Undone is talking about setting his zebras to 32% because that's where you should be exposing middle gray. Now, the problem with that is, like, first of all, not anybody that I know is gonna be like running around with a middle gray card out in the field on location while traveling. Like, it's just not realistic to have that. What I end up doing is I set my zebras for 100, and that is my peaking level, or where my highlights start to clip and I lose all that information. And then essentially what I'll do is when I see the zebras appear, I know there are parts of my image that are clipping, and then I will lower the exposure until there are no zebras appearing on my image or my monitor at all. And that lets me know, hey, everything that I'm seeing or everything that I'm filming now will be totally retainable. I can retain the highlights. There's still information in the shadows. So I'm literally achieving the highest dynamic range that I possibly can. Okay, next question is from Rio Pramana Jaya, and the question is, in low light conditions, do you use zebra settings at 100 plus as well? So this is tricky because you're usually not too worried about your highlights in low light or night conditions. So in that case, I would probably suggest using something like your waveform monitor instead. That might give you a better indication of where your general levels are landing. False colors would also be a really good tool to use, but yeah, in super low light or like nighttime conditions, unless you have your own lights that you're using, I don't know if setting your zebras at 100 plus is really gonna do you any good. Okay, question 10 from C. Krizik. Only issue I would be worried about is encountering grain when upping the ISO. What would I do in that situation? And he's talking about the exposing SLOG-2 video. So for this situation, it's really interesting because you always have to find that balance, right? Luckily, these Sony cameras are really good at low light conditions, so you can get to like 6400 ISO and higher without really seeing a significant amount of grain or shadow noise increase. So you really have to just like teeter on the edge of not pushing your ISO too high, but also exposing 1.5, 2 stops over even in dark conditions so that there isn't a lot of noise in your shadows. Because if you are shooting a dark nighttime situation and you underexpose, you know, you're gonna get just tons of noise in that shadows. Okay, this is gonna be the last question. So this is from Ikwan Azmi. Question is, do we need to use white balance when shooting in S-Log? Yes, because you're shooting in log doesn't mean that like white balance or tint go out the window, like you don't have to worry about that anymore. I would still very much do your best to, you know, get your color balance as correct as possible. And then yes, shooting in log gives you a little bit more flexibility, so you can make shifts with temperature as needed, but yeah, just because you're shooting in log doesn't mean you don't have to care about your settings or anything like that anymore. So one last thing I wanted to mention is that I see a lot of people that are very confused about shooting log and getting very frustrated with the results that they're getting. I'd like to challenge you to think about why you're choosing to shoot log. Some questions to think about are, do you need to achieve the widest dynamic range in your shooting scenario? Is a colorist going to be working on this project for you? Are you planning on doing some heavy color grading yourself? And if so, are you experienced? A lot of people just want to shoot log because they think it makes it cinematic, but it really takes a lot of years to truly master. I'm far from the end of my learning journey, but it did take me a long time to get where I am and feeling confident in what I was doing. So before you jump into shooting your next big project in log, I'd spend some time practicing, testing things out, and really getting comfortable and finding a workflow that works for you before you just go ahead and start shooting SLOG-2 all over the place. Well, that's all the time I have for questions in this video, but I wouldn't be surprised if I end up doing another video like this down the road. As always, feel free to drop any of those comments down that you have below. And for more information on exposing, color grading, SLOG-2, Sony Mirrorless cameras, make sure to check out all the other videos that I've created and put up on this channel. I'll make sure to link those down below. I appreciate you watching, and as always, I'll see you on the next one. Peace.